I was 28 years old when my life changed forever. Standing in the doorway of my small apartment, I stared in disbelief at my siblings on the threshold. Mia, 14, avoided my gaze while the 10-year-old twins Jackson and Jordan clutched matching worn suitcases. Behind them, I caught a glimpse of my mother's car speeding away, taillights disappearing around the corner. The note crumpled in my hand read words that would haunt me. "You wanted to be so responsible, now's your chance." A knot formed in my stomach as I realized what had just happened. My mother had abandoned my siblings at my door, and the decision I made next would change all our lives forever. If you've ever faced a family crisis that forced you to make an impossible choice, share where you're watching from and subscribe to hear how I handled my mother abandoning my siblings at my doorstep, and whether calling the police made me the bad guy in this story. Growing up in a small town outside Atlanta, Georgia, wasn't the idyllic Southern childhood movies portray. My mother, Sandra, was beautiful, charismatic, and deeply unstable. When people met her, they were charmed instantly by her bright smile and infectious laugh. What they didn't see was the woman who disappeared for days when life became overwhelming, or who spent our grocery money on new clothes to impress whatever man had caught her attention that month. My father left when I was 6 years old. I have vague memories of a tall man with a deep laugh who would swing me around in circles until I was dizzy with delight. Those memories grew fainter with each passing year until they became more like scenes from a movie I once watched rather than my actual life. He never sent birthday cards, called, or paid child support. It was as though he simply evaporated from existence, leaving me alone with Sandra. From that young age, I became the responsible one in our household. While other kids were playing after school, I was figuring out how to stretch a can of soup to feed both of us when Sandra forgot to go grocery shopping. I learned to forge her signature on school permission slips and make excuses for why she never attended parent-teacher conferences. "My mom works nights" became my standard explanation, though in reality, she was often out with friends or boyfriends who cycled through our lives in an endless parade of temporary father figures. When I was 14, Sandra got pregnant with Mia. The man whose name I can barely remember now stuck around just long enough to see Mia born before deciding fatherhood wasn't for him. Suddenly, at 14, I wasn't just responsible for myself, but for a newborn too. I learned to change diapers, prepare bottles, and soothe a colicky baby while trying to keep up with freshman year homework. "Pascal, you're so good with her," Sandra would coo when she noticed me caring for Mia. "You're a natural mother." What she meant was that she could rely on me to pick up her slack to love Mia enough for both of us. 4 years later, when I was 18 and preparing for community college applications, Sandra announced she was pregnant again, this time with twins. Jackson and Jordan were born 7 months later, premature, but healthy. Their father, unlike Mia's, did try for a while. Tom was kind and seemed genuinely interested in being a father. But Sandra's chaotic nature eventually drove him away too. He sent money occasionally and called the twins on birthdays until they were about 5. Then he also faded from our lives. The responsibilities that fell on my shoulders grew exponentially. Preparing meals, helping with homework, working part-time jobs to buy necessities that Sandra overlooked like winter coats and school supplies. The weight of it was crushing, but the alternative, seeing my siblings neglected, was unthinkable. There was one incident when I was 16 that stands out in my memory as particularly horrific. Sandra told me she was going away for the weekend with her boyfriend at the time. "Just 2 nights, Pascal. You can handle Mia for that long, right?" But 2 nights turned into 3, then a week, then 2 weeks with no word from her. My cell phone was flooded with increasingly desperate voicemails I left that went unanswered. I was caring for 2-year-old Mia alone, trying to attend school and working weekends at a local diner. I would bring Mia with me to work, setting her up in a booth with coloring books while I served customers. My manager, a gruff but kind-hearted woman named Faye, pretended not to notice, slipping Mia pancakes and keeping an eye on her while I worked my shifts. The school counselor eventually noticed something was wrong when I fell asleep during an exam. She called me into her office, and through tears of exhaustion, I confessed that my mother had disappeared and I was alone with my sister. Her face hardened as she reached for the phone. "I need to call Child Protective Services, Pascal. This is neglect." Panic seized me. "Please don't," I begged. "They'll take Mia away. They might separate us. Please just give me a little more time." The counselor reluctantly agreed to wait 24 hours. That night, as though sensing the threat, Sandra waltzed through the door with shopping bags and excuses about her phone being lost and her boyfriend's car breaking down. The next day, she came to school with me all motherly concern and promises to the counselor that it had all been a big misunderstanding. That was the pattern of our lives. Sandra would push the boundaries of neglect to their limits, then swoop in with just enough mothering to keep the authorities at bay. And through it all, I was the glue holding our family together, developing a bond with my siblings that was forged in the fires of shared adversity. Despite the chaos, I loved them fiercely. Mia, with her artistic talent and quiet determination. Jackson, the more sensitive of the twins, who could spend hours lost in books. And Jordan, whose quick wit and easy smile could brighten even our darkest days. They deserved so much better than what they got, and I was determined to provide whatever stability I could in the storm of Sandra's making. By the time I turned 20, the weight of responsibility had become familiar, like a heavy backpack I'd grown accustomed to carrying. Community college classes filled my mornings, while afternoons and evenings were split between my job at a local office supply store and caring for my siblings. Sleep was a luxury I rarely enjoyed, fully catching moments between helping with homework and preparing for my own exams. Sandra's behavior didn't improve as the years passed. If anything, her irresponsibility deepened with the comfortable knowledge that I would always pick up her slack. Rent money disappeared on impulse purchases. Food stamps meant to feed 3 growing children were traded for cigarettes or alcohol. Bills piled up until service disconnection notices plastered our refrigerator like macabre decorations. "Mom, we need to talk about the electric bill," I'd say, standing in our cramped kitchen with the red notice in hand. "They're going to shut it off next week." Sandra would sigh dramatically as though I was the one causing problems. "You're always so worried about everything, Pascal. I'll handle it." But handling it usually meant waiting until the power was actually cut, then begging me to use my meager savings to restore service. The parade of men continued through our lives, each one greeted by Sandra with renewed hope that this one might be different. They rarely were. Some were merely selfish-focused entirely on Sandra and irritated by the presence of children. Others were worse, bringing drugs into the home or drinking until their tempers flared over minor infractions. I tried to shield my siblings from the worst of it, creating a bubble of normalcy within the chaos. Weekly movie nights in my bedroom with a laptop and smuggled snacks. Homework sessions at the kitchen table while Sandra entertained in the living room. Secret birthday celebrations when Sandra inevitably forgot. My life began to change when I met Ethan during my 3rd year of community college. He was working at the campus bookstore, and over several visits purchasing textbooks I couldn't really afford. We struck up a friendship that slowly blossomed into something more. Ethan was steady in all the ways my life had never been. He came from a stable family with parents still married after 30 years. He had clear goals and plans for his future. Most importantly, he saw me, really saw me, beneath the exhaustion and responsibility. "You're amazing, you know that," he said once after watching me juggle dinner preparation, helping Mia with algebra, and quizzing myself for an upcoming exam. "But you shouldn't have to do all this alone." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged the unfairness of my situation without dismissing it or suggesting I abandon my siblings to their fate. Ethan didn't just see the weight I carried, he offered to help carry it. As our relationship deepened, So did his understanding of my family dynamics. He witnessed Sandra's manipulation firsthand, saw how she would guilt me into canceling plans with him to watch the kids while she went out. He noticed how she would borrow money without intention of repayment, how she would undermine my authority with the kids when it suited her. "This isn't healthy," he told me gently after a particularly bad evening when Sandra had returned home at 3 in the morning, bringing loud friends with her despite knowing the kids had school the next day. "Not for you, and not for your siblings either." I knew he was right, but the thought of changing things terrified me. Who would protect the kids if I wasn't there? Who would make sure they had clean clothes for school, or help with their science projects? Who would notice when Mia was unusually quiet, or when the twins were fighting more than normal? The turning point came when Sandra introduced us to her newest boyfriend, Mark. Unlike the others, Mark didn't fade away after a few weeks. He moved in, bringing with him a controlling presence that changed the atmosphere of our home. He monitored Sandra's spending, which at first seemed positive until I realized it was less about responsibility and more about ensuring her money went where he wanted it. He instituted house rules that conveniently exempted himself and Sandra. Worst of all, he seemed to resent my role in the family, constantly undermining me with the kids. "You're not their mother," he'd say sharply when I reminded the twins about homework. "Stop trying to act like you run things around here." The tension between us grew, making the small house feel even more cramped. Mark would accidentally throw away my school assignments or schedule family outings when he knew I had exams to study for. He'd whisper to Sandra when I entered rooms, leading to her giving me cold looks, or picking fights over trivial matters. One evening, after a particularly nasty argument where Mark suggested I was jealous of Sandra's relationship with him, Ethan made a suggestion that both terrified and tempted me. "Move in with me," he said simply. "My apartment isn't huge, but there's room for you. You can finish your degree without all this drama." "I can't leave the kids," I replied automatically, the very thought sending panic through me. "I'm not suggesting you abandon them," Ethan clarified. "But maybe some distance would force Sandra to actually be a parent. You could still see them regularly, still be involved in their lives." The idea took root in my mind, growing stronger as conditions at home worsened. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe my constant presence was enabling Sandra's irresponsibility. Maybe some distance would actually benefit everyone. The decision to move out at 26 was the hardest I'd ever made. Telling Sandra triggered exactly the reaction I'd expected: accusations of betrayal, dramatic tears, guilt-laden statements about family loyalty. Telling my siblings was worse. Mia, 12 by then, understood on some level, but still looked betrayed. The 8-year-old twins were confused and upset, clinging to me as though I might disappear that very moment. "I'm not abandoning you," I promised, gathering all three in a tight hug. "I'll see you all the time. We'll have special days together. And you can call me whenever you need me, day or night." I moved into Ethan's 1-bedroom apartment across town, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to create the boundary I desperately needed. I established a routine of weekend visits, phone calls every evening to help with homework, and being present for every school performance and sports game. I hoped that with me gone, Sandra would step up to fill the gap. I hoped that by removing myself as a safety net, she would finally be forced to become the mother our family needed. How wrong I was. The 2 years after moving out were a complicated mixture of guilt, freedom, and constant worry. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it was like to live in a peaceful home. Ethan and I settled into a comfortable routine in our small but cozy apartment. Mornings no longer involved frantic searches for missing shoes or homework assignments. Evenings were quiet with actual conversations instead of constant crisis management. I felt like I could finally breathe. I completed my associate's degree in business administration, a milestone that had seemed impossible when juggling full-time caregiving with studies. The ceremony was small but significant. Ethan sat in the audience, cheering loudly when my name was called, along with a few close friends I'd made once I had the time and energy for friendships. Sandra didn't attend claiming a migraine, though social media later showed her and Mark at a concert that same day. My career began to take shape too. The part-time office job I had maintained through college offered me a full-time position with benefits. For the first time, I had health insurance that didn't come from state assistance. My boss, a pragmatic woman named Diane, recognized my work ethic and began mentoring me for potential advancement. The regular hours and stability were luxuries I had never imagined possible. Ethan proposed on our second anniversary with a simple solitaire ring that represented everything I'd never thought I deserved: a promise of permanence from someone who chose to love me rather than being obligated by blood. We began planning a small wedding, setting a date for the following spring. Another first, planning for my own happiness rather than merely responding to others' needs. Perhaps most significantly, I started therapy. Untangling the complex web of family dynamics, learning about codependency and parentification. Recognizing patterns I was determined not to repeat. My therapist, Dr. Brenner, helped me navigate the swirling emotions of guilt, responsibility, and the tentative hope for my own future. Boundaries aren't selfish, she reminded me during sessions when the guilt threatened to overwhelm me. They're necessary for healthy relationships. Throughout this period of personal growth, I remained deeply connected to my siblings. Our relationship evolved rather than diminished. Weekend visits became special occasions rather than extensions of daily caregiving. I took Mia shopping for clothes that expressed her developing personal style rather than just meeting basic needs. I attended the twins' soccer games as a supportive sister, cheering from the sidelines without the stress of coordinating the entire family's schedule around the events. But beneath these positive changes, I noticed concerning signs at my mother's home. Each visit revealed subtle deterioration in conditions. The refrigerator grew increasingly empty. Laundry piled up in corners. The twins mentioned going to bed hungry more frequently. Mia, now in high school, became withdrawn and moody beyond typical teenage behavior. "Mom's never home anymore," she confided during one of our sister lunch dates. "Mark got her a job at the bar where he works, so they're both gone until really late. I'm watching the twins almost every night." History was repeating itself, with Mia stepping into the caretaker role I had vacated. The knowledge sat like a stone in my stomach. I confronted Sandra during my next visit, trying to keep my tone non-accusatory. "The kids mentioned you're working nights now. Are you sure that's working out for everyone?" Her defensiveness flared immediately. "We need the money, Pascal. Not everyone has it as easy as you do now with your fancy office job. Some of us have to work for a living." "That's not fair," I replied, struggling to maintain calm. "I'm just concerned about the kids being alone so much." "Oh, now you're concerned." Sandra's voice rose sharply. "You weren't concerned when you moved out to play house with Ethan. Don't come in here acting like Mother of the Year when you abandoned your family." These confrontations became a regular feature of our interactions, always ending with Sandra turning my concerns back on me, accusing me of thinking I was better than them now, or forgetting where I came from. Productive conversation seemed impossible. I discussed legal options with Dr. Brenner, researching what rights I might have as a sibling if conditions deteriorated further. The answers were disheartening. Without clear evidence of abuse or neglect severe enough to warrant intervention, there was little I could do. I wasn't a parent, just a concerned sister, and the bar for removing children from their mother's care was rightfully high. Financial strain added another layer of stress. While my new job provided stability, supporting myself while also helping my siblings stretched my budget to breaking point. I regularly brought groceries to Sandra's house, paid for school supplies, covered athletic fees for the twins, and bought clothes when I noticed items becoming too small or worn. Ethan never complained, even as our wedding fund grew more slowly than planned, even as vacations were postponed in favor of helping my family. "They're my family too now," he said simply when I apologized for the strain. "We'll figure it out together." A particularly concerning call came from Mia about 2 months before everything changed. I was working late, finishing a quarterly report, when my phone lit up with her name. Pascale. Her voice sounded small, younger than her 14 years. I think something weird is happening. What do you mean, weird? Immediate alarm bells rang in my head. Mom and Mark have been whispering a lot. I heard them talking about going away for a while and making a fresh start. When I asked Mom about it, she got super defensive and said I was eavesdropping. Did they say anything specific about you and the twins? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart raced. No, but they've been acting strange. Mark sold his motorcycle yesterday, and Mom took a bunch of her nice jewelry to that pawn shop on Elm Street. I reassured Mia that I'd check in with Sandra that everything would be fine, but after hanging up, I sat at my desk with a growing sense of dread. Something was coming. I just didn't know what or when. I had no idea that the answer would arrive on my doorstep just 2 weeks later. It was an ordinary Thursday in October. The Georgia heat had finally broken, giving way to crisp autumn air that hinted at the coming winter. I arrived home from work around 5:30, juggling my laptop bag and a bag of Chinese takeout, looking forward to a quiet evening with Ethan. He was working late, so dinner and maybe a movie on the couch was the extent of my plans. The doorbell rang just as I was changing out of my work clothes. Annoyed at the interruption, I threw on a sweater and hurried to answer, assuming it was a package delivery or perhaps a neighbor. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me. Mia stood at the threshold, her face a mask of forced bravery that couldn't quite hide the fear underneath. Beside her, the twins clutched matching suitcases, Jordan silently crying, while Jackson stared at his shoes. At first, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. Why were they here on a school night? Where was Sandra's car? Mom dropped us off, Mia said before I could ask, her voice tight with controlled emotion. She said to give you this. She thrust a folded piece of paper into my hand. The note, hastily scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt, read, "You wanted to be so responsible, now's your chance. Back in a month, maybe." I read it twice, certain I had misunderstood. The implications were too monstrous to comprehend immediately. I looked past the children to the street, half expecting to see Sandra's car parked at the curb, this all some elaborate and cruel joke. Instead, I caught a glimpse of familiar taillights disappearing around the corner at the end of the block. "Come inside," I managed, stepping back to allow them entry. The twins moved mechanically, their small bodies rigid with tension. Mia maintained her composure until the door closed behind them, then her facade cracked. "She just drove away," she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "She didn't even say goodbye properly." The apartment suddenly seemed impossibly small as reality crashed down. 1 bedroom, a tiny living room, a kitchenette barely large enough for 2 people. Now home to 5. The practical concerns battled with emotional ones in my mind, both equally overwhelming. "Are you hungry?" I asked, grasping at normalcy while my thoughts raced. "I have Chinese food enough to share." The twins nodded mutely while Mia shrugged, still fighting tears. I busied myself with plates and forks, mind whirring with frantic calculations. Where would they sleep? What about school tomorrow? Did they have enough clothes? What was I legally permitted to do in this situation? I called Sandra's cell phone while the kids picked at their food. Straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again, and again, leaving increasingly urgent messages that ranged from concerned to pleading to angry. No response. When Ethan arrived home an hour later, he took in the scene with wide eyes, but recovered quickly, greeting the kids warmly before pulling me into the bedroom for a hushed consultation. "What happened?" he asked, voice low to avoid being overheard. I showed him the note, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to anger. "She just abandoned them, just like that." "Apparently," I replied, the reality still not fully processing. "I've been calling nonstop. Nothing." Ethan's face hardened with resolve. We'll figure this out. Right now, let's focus on making them comfortable tonight. We returned to the living room where the kids sat in uncomfortable silence. Gradually, through gentle questioning, the full story emerged. Sandra and Mark had picked the kids up from school, driving directly to my apartment without explanation until they were parked outside. Mom said we were going to visit you, Jackson explained, his 10-year-old face screwed up in confusion. But then she told us to take our suitcases. She said you wanted us to stay with you for a while. Jordan added, his voice small. Is that true? The innocent question broke my heart. I always want to see you guys, I said carefully. I just wish Mom had talked to me about it first. Mia, more perceptive than her brothers, scoffed. They're going to Vegas, she revealed bitterly. I heard them talking about it last week. Mark's cousin works at some casino there and got him a job. Did they say when they'd be back? I asked. Mia shook her head. Mom just kept saying they needed to start fresh and leave the baggage behind. I guess we're the baggage. The twins looked stricken at this interpretation, prompting me to quickly reassure them. You are not baggage. You are wonderful kids who deserve much better than this. The immediate logistics were daunting. We cobbled together sleeping arrangements, the twins sharing the couch, while Mia took an air mattress on the living room floor. They had some clothes hastily packed, but Jackson's inhaler was missing, and Jordan had forgotten his favorite stuffed animal he still slept with. Mia had her phone but no charger. None of them had their school books or completed homework for the next day. Hour after hour passed with no word from Sandra. By midnight, even Mia had fallen into exhausted sleep while Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, voices low, discussing options. We should call the police, Ethan suggested. File a missing persons report at least. She's not missing, I countered. She left voluntarily. Then file an abandonment report. This is child abandonment, Pascal. The word hung heavy between us. Abandonment, official involvement, authorities. The very scenarios I had spent my entire life avoiding, protecting our family's precarious balance from outside scrutiny. What if they take the kids away? I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. What if they get split up in foster care? What if Sandra never comes back? Ethan countered gently. What if you have no legal right to keep them in school, take them to doctors, make decisions for them? We need to establish some legal standing here. Deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't a temporary childcare arrangement. This was abandonment, plain and simple. After hours of failed contact attempts, after the kids were settled, after weighing all options, I made the hardest phone call of my life. The police arrived quietly, without sirens, mindful of the sleeping children. They took statements, photographed the note, asked detailed questions about Sandra and Mark's behavior leading up to this moment. They were professional, but concerned particularly when they learned about the history of instability. It was Mia who ultimately solidified my decision. Waking during the police interview, she came to sit beside me, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. Mom needs consequences this time, she said firmly when I explained what was happening. She can't keep doing this to us. From the mouth of a 14-year-old, the truth I had been avoiding for years. Our mother needed consequences, boundaries, accountability. And my siblings needed stability, even if it came at the cost of family secrets finally being exposed. The first 48 hours after Sandra abandoned the children were a blur of official interactions and logistical nightmares. The police report triggered an automatic notification to Child Protective Services, bringing a caseworker named Janelle to our apartment by the following afternoon. Middle-aged with kind eyes behind sensible glasses, she projected a calm competence that was reassuring in the midst of chaos. I'm not here to cause additional trauma, she explained as we sat at the crowded kitchen table. My priority is the children's well-being and stability. The twins watched with wide, frightened eyes from the couch, while Mia hovered protectively near them. Their fear was palpable, the specter of foster care looming large in their imagination. "Are you going to take us away?" Jordan asked in a small voice. Janelle addressed him directly, her tone gentle but honest. "My job is to make sure you're safe and cared for. Your sister has opened her home to you, which is wonderful. We need to make sure this arrangement works for everyone." The assessment was thorough but compassionate. Janelle asked about my relationship with the children, financial resources, living arrangements, and support systems. She spoke privately with each child, ensuring they felt safe and comfortable. The inadequate space was an obvious concern, the single-bedroom apartment clearly not designed for 5 people long-term. "I can apply for a bigger place," I assured her. "We'll make it work until then." "I understand this is a temporary solution," Janelle acknowledged. "But temporary could mean weeks or months depending on your mother's actions going forward." She explained the emergency temporary guardianship process, a stopgap that would give me limited legal authority to care for the children while longer-term arrangements were determined. The paperwork was daunting, requiring character references, income verification, and a home assessment despite the obvious space limitations. "I'm expediting this as much as possible," Janelle promised. "The alternative would be temporary foster placement, which I'd like to avoid if we can establish you as a suitable guardian." The phrase "suitable guardian" lodged in my chest. Would I be deemed suitable? My one-bedroom apartment, my entry-level job, my life finally taking shape around my own needs rather than others, all now being evaluated for adequacy by outside authorities. Ethan stepped up without hesitation, providing a character reference and assuring Janelle of his commitment to supporting all of us. My boss, Diane, upon learning of the situation, not only provided a glowing professional reference, but arranged for emergency family leave so I could navigate the immediate crisis without jeopardizing my position. "Family comes first," she told me firmly during a brief phone call. "Your job will be here when things settle." The logistics of those first days were overwhelming. The twins needed to be enrolled in the elementary school in our district, requiring immunization records and previous school transcripts. Mia's high school transfer was equally complicated. None had adequate clothing or personal items for an extended stay. Jackson's missing inhaler required an emergency doctor's visit for a replacement prescription. Sleep became a luxury as Ethan and I transformed our tiny living room into a makeshift bedroom, purchasing air mattresses and privacy screens with money we'd been saving for our wedding. Our apartment manager, initially concerned about occupancy limits, softened upon learning of the circumstances, allowing the temporary arrangement while warning we would need a larger unit if the situation extended beyond a month. The emotional toll was perhaps even greater than the practical challenges. The twins experienced nightmares, waking crying for a mother who had chosen to abandon them. Mia oscillated between angry defiance and crushing sadness, trying to be strong for her brothers while processing her own feelings of rejection. Ethan, though unfailingly supportive, showed signs of strain as our private space disappeared overnight and our future plans were indefinitely postponed. In the midst of this chaos, our attempts to locate Sandra continued. Her social media provided the only clues, a trail of party photos from various Las Vegas locations appearing sporadically. She looked carefree, her arm draped around Mark, cocktails in hand. No indication that she had left 3 children behind. Her friends, when contacted, claimed ignorance or offered vague assurances that Sandra would never really abandon her kids permanently. Mark's family was equally unhelpful. His brother, the only contact I had, answered my call with audible reluctance. "Look, I don't know what their plans are," he said, impatience evident. "Mark mentioned something about a fresh start, but he doesn't tell me everything. Not my business, is it?" "It becomes your business when children are involved," I countered. "These are your nephew's siblings we're talking about." "Step-siblings," he corrected coldly. "And that's between Mark and Sandra. I'm staying out of it." The realization that this abandonment had been premeditated was perhaps the most painful discovery. The sold motorcycle, The pawned jewelry, the whispered conversations about fresh starts, all pointed to a calculated decision rather than an impulsive action. Sandra hadn't snapped under pressure. She had deliberately chosen to leave her children behind in pursuit of a new life with Mark. Amidst the darkness, however, unexpected support emerged. My co-workers organized a meal delivery rotation, ensuring we had dinner each night during the crisis. A neighbor offered extra bedding and children's books her own kids had outgrown. The school counselors provided resources for helping children through trauma and arranged fee waivers for necessary school supplies. On the fifth night after the abandonment, just as the twins had finally fallen asleep and Mia was showering, my phone rang with an unknown Las Vegas area code. My heart jumped to my throat, but after the emotional roller coaster of the past days, I let it go to voicemail, not ready for whatever Sandra might say. The message she left would prove pivotal in the days to come, though not in the way any of us expected. The voicemail from Sandra came through at 11:37 p.m. Her voice slurred and accusatory in a way that suggested she'd been drinking heavily. "So, you called the cops on me, real nice, Pascal. Real sisterly of you," she began, words running together. "You always wanted to take my kids, always trying to show me up, be the perfect mother when you're not even their mother. It was supposed to be temporary just until we got settled. But no, you had to get authorities involved. Mark is furious. His probation officer might find out he left the state now." The revelation about Mark's probation was new and concerning, but not entirely surprising. Sandra had always been drawn to men with complicated pasts. "You think you're so perfect with your job and your fiancé and your perfect little life?" she continued bitterly. "Well, enjoy playing mommy until we get back. And trust me, we will be back. You haven't heard the last of this." The message ended with muffled voices and what sounded like an argument before cutting off abruptly. I played it twice, stomach knotting tighter with each listen before sharing it with Ethan. "His probation officer," Ethan repeated, eyebrows raised. "Well, that explains the sudden departure. I wonder what he was on probation for." "Nothing good," I replied grimly. "And apparently they're planning to come back eventually." "They can try," Ethan said firmly. "But legally she's abandoned her children. That's going to have consequences." Those consequences began materializing quickly. News of the situation spread through my extended family and Sandra's social circle, bringing a wave of unsolicited opinions and criticism. My maternal grandmother, who had largely been absent from our lives, suddenly called to berate me. "Family business should stay within the family," she lectured. "Calling the police on your own mother? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about 3 children who were abandoned on my doorstep," I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. "What would you have done?" "Handled it privately like family should. Sandra would have come back eventually. She always does." That was precisely the problem. Sandra's pattern of disappearing and returning had created a lifetime of instability for her children. But explaining this to people who had enabled her behavior for decades proved futile. Sandra's friends were equally judgmental, several sending messages suggesting I had always been jealous of Sandra, or always wanted to take the kids. One particularly cruel message suggested I had trapped the children as a way to force Ethan into creating an instant family. The accusation was so absurd, it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so hurtful. Social media became a battleground as distant relatives and mutual acquaintances took sides. I made the difficult decision to deactivate my accounts temporarily, unable to handle the additional stress of public judgment on top of everything else. The practical challenges continued mounting. Our 1-bedroom apartment, barely adequate for 2 adults, became increasingly cramped with 5 people. The twins' energy, normally endearing, became overwhelming in the confined space. Neighbors complained about noise as bedtime routines stretched late into the evening with children unaccustomed to apartment living. Privacy became non-existent, putting strain on my relationship with Ethan despite his unwavering support. Financial pressure intensified as our expenses doubled overnight. Grocery bills skyrocketed, clothing needs accumulated, and unexpected costs appeared daily. School field trip fees, doctor's appointments, new shoes, when Jordan's fell apart, all drawing from savings meant for our wedding. We made the difficult decision to postpone our plans indefinitely, the modest diamond on my finger, a reminder of dreams temporarily set aside. Work became increasingly difficult to balance with my new responsibilities. Despite Diane's initial understanding, I could sense her patience wearing thin as I requested flexible hours to accommodate school pickups and drop-offs. My productivity suffered from lack of sleep and constant stress, my focus fractured by the never-ending mental load of caring for 3 traumatized children. Mia's behavior began deteriorating at her new school. She skipped classes, talked back to teachers, and withdrew from social interactions. The school counselor called me in for a conference expressing concern about her adjustment. "This is quite different from her previous school records," the counselor noted. "She was an honor roll student before the transfer. She's been through a lot." I explained the understatement of the year. "Her entire life has been uprooted." One evening, after a particularly difficult day, where Mia had received detention for mouthing off to a teacher, I found her crying silently in the bathroom, the only place in our crowded apartment offering any privacy. "I'm sorry," she whispered when I sat beside her on the edge of the tub. "I know I'm making everything harder." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I assured her. "None of this is your fault." "But it is," she insisted, tears flowing freely now. "If I hadn't told you about Mom and Mark talking about Vegas, if I hadn't complained about them being gone all the time, maybe they wouldn't have left us." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Mia had been carrying this guilt, believing her actions had somehow triggered the abandonment. "Listen to me," I said firmly, taking her hands in mine. "Mom made her choice. She's the adult, and adults are responsible for their own actions. Nothing you did or said caused this. Nothing." As Mia sobbed against my shoulder, I felt a renewed determination hardening within me. These children deserved better, and I would fight to give it to them regardless of criticism or challenges. In the midst of this turmoil, I found myself questioning my decisions constantly. Had I overreacted by calling the police? Should I have quietly accepted the situation and waited for Sandra to return? Was I wrong for involving authorities rather than handling it within the family, as my grandmother suggested? Seeking validation and perspective. I posted anonymously on a relationship advice forum with the title, AITA for calling the police after my mom abandoned my siblings at my door. The responses were mixed, some supportive, while others criticized YTA. Family takes care of family. Cops shouldn't be involved in family matters. NTA. Abandoning children is illegal for good reason. You did what was necessary. Info. Did you even try to work something out with your mom first? The conflicting opinions only added to my uncertainty until I received a call from Janelle, the CPS caseworker who had been handling our case. "I wanted to check in on how you're all adjusting," she began. After listening to my candid assessment of our struggles, she offered perspective that finally broke through the doubt. "Pascal, you're not wrong for requiring adults to be adults," she said firmly. "Your mother made a choice to abandon her responsibilities. You stepped up to protect vulnerable children. The system isn't perfect, but in this case, involving authorities was absolutely the right call." Her professional validation unlocked something in me. For years, I had internalized the belief that family problems should remain private, that seeking outside help was somehow a betrayal. Janelle helped me see that some situations require intervention, that protecting children sometimes means challenging the family status quo. With renewed clarity, I arranged for all of us to begin family therapy sessions. The twins initially resisted, not understanding how talking would help bring their mother back. Mia participated reluctantly, arms crossed defensively during the first session. But gradually, the skilled therapist created a space where all of us could express our complicated feelings, a first step toward processing the trauma we were experiencing. As we approached the 3-week mark of our new reality, I began to believe we might actually find a way forward, imperfect, but sustainable. Then everything changed again with a single pounding knock on our apartment door. The knock came on a Sunday morning, aggressive and insistent. The twins were still in pajamas, building an elaborate fort from couch cushions and blankets. Mia was helping me prepare pancakes in the kitchen while Ethan showered. The domestic tranquility we'd struggled to establish shattered instantly with the sound. Through the peephole, I saw them, Sandra face tight with anger, and Mark looming behind her, his expression equally hostile. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned to Mia. "Take the boys to the bedroom," I instructed quietly. "Stay there until I call you." She nodded, immediately understanding the situation. I waited until the bedroom door closed before opening the front door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Where are my kids?" Sandra demanded without greeting, attempting to peer past me into the apartment. She looked different after just 3 weeks, her hair newly dyed platinum blonde, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the cloudy day. Mark stood slightly behind her, arms crossed over his chest in an intentionally intimidating posture. "They're safe," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Which is more than I could say when you abandoned them on my doorstep." "Don't be so dramatic," Sandra scoffed. "It wasn't abandonment. It was a temporary arrangement that you blew completely out of proportion." "A temporary arrangement would have involved asking me first, not leaving a note and disappearing," I countered. "And temporary arrangements don't involve changing your phone number and ignoring messages for weeks." "We were getting settled," Mark interjected. "Setting up our new place. You couldn't handle the kids for a few weeks without crying to the cops." "You left the state while on probation," I reminded him. "Was that part of getting settled too?" His face darkened dangerously. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I replied, grateful for the security chain between us. "And I know that 3 children were traumatized by being abandoned without warning or explanation." "Open the door, Pascal," Sandra demanded, her voice rising. "I'm their mother. You have no right to keep them from me." "Actually, I have temporary guardianship," I informed her, the legal document having been finalized just days earlier. "And given the circumstances, I'm not comfortable having this conversation with the children present. If you want to discuss next steps, we can arrange a meeting with the caseworker." "Caseworker?" Sandra's face contorted with rage. "You got CPS involved, how dare you?" "You abandoned your children, Sandra," I said, using her name deliberately rather than Mom. "What did you think would happen?" Mark stepped forward, placing his hand on the door. "Listen, this has gone far enough. Open the door or we'll call the police ourselves." The irony of his threat was not lost on me. "Go ahead," I replied calmly. "I'm sure they'd be very interested in speaking with you, especially about crossing state lines while on probation." His expression confirmed I'd hit a nerve. Before the situation could escalate further, Ethan appeared beside me, hair still damp from his shower, but stance protective. "Is there a problem?" he asked, voice deliberately casual, but eyes alert. "This doesn't concern you," Mark snapped. "Actually, it does," Ethan replied. "This is my home too, and you're causing a disturbance." Sandra's tactics shifted instantly, tears replacing rage as she appealed to me directly. "Pascal, please. They're my babies. I made a mistake. I just want to see them." The manipulation was so familiar it almost worked from muscle memory alone. Almost. But 3 weeks of witnessing the children's pain had inoculated me against her performative remorse. "I'll discuss visitation with the caseworker," I repeated firmly. "For now, I'm asking you to leave before this upsets the children further." "You can't do this!" Sandra's voice rose to a shout. "I'll fight you. I'll take you to court." "They're my children." A door down the hall opened, our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, peering out with concern. "Everything okay out here? Should I call someone?" Before I could respond, the situation escalated further with the arrival of an unexpected ally. The elevator doors opened to reveal my grandmother Dorothy, whom I hadn't seen in months, accompanied by a stern-looking man carrying a briefcase. "What perfect timing," Dorothy remarked, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. At 75, she retained the commanding presence that had intimidated me as a child. "Sandra, I thought I might find you here causing a scene." "Mother," Sandra acknowledged, momentarily thrown off balance. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up your mess as usual," Dorothy replied crisply. "And bringing Mr. Abernathy, the family attorney, to discuss some rather serious financial matters with you." The mention of financial matters visibly unsettled both Sandra and Mark. "What financial matters?" Sandra asked, suspicion evident in her tone. Dorothy nodded to Mr. Abernathy, who stepped forward with professional detachment. "Ms. Thompson, we have documentation indicating systematic embezzlement from the family trust established by your father. Funds specifically designated for both you and your daughter Pascal's education and welfare have been diverted to personal accounts over the past several years." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Family trust. This was the first I'd heard of any such arrangement. Sandra's expression confirmed the accusation, shock and guilt flashing across her face before she recovered. "That's ridiculous," she blustered. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Dorothy countered. "I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to address it. Your abandonment of your children provided that moment." Mark began backing away slowly, his allegiance to Sandra evidently having limits. "I don't know anything about any trust," he muttered. "This is between you people." Dorothy fixed him with a withering stare. "Indeed, though the authorities might be interested in knowing about your parole violation. I believe crossing state lines without permission is frowned upon." The color drained from Mark's face as he realized the extent of Dorothy's knowledge. Without another word, he turned and walked rapidly toward the stairwell, leaving Sandra alone to face the consequences. "Mark!" Sandra called after him, disbelief and betrayal in her voice, as he disappeared without looking back. "Charming fellow," Dorothy observed dryly. "Such loyalty." From my position in the doorway, still protected by the security chain, I witnessed my mother's careful facade crumble entirely. The bravado, the righteousness, the accusations all melted away, leaving only a woman who had finally run out of escapes from her own actions. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly looking much smaller. "Now," Dorothy replied firmly, "we discuss the legal and financial consequences of your choices away from these premises. Mr. Abernathy has prepared the necessary documentation for your review." As Sandra was led away by my grandmother and the attorney, she glanced back, once a complicated mixture of emotions on her face. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first recognition that her actions had finally caught up with her. I closed the door quietly, turning to find Ethan watching me with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Before I could answer, the bedroom door opened and 3 anxious faces peered out. The twins rushed toward me immediately, wrapping their arms around my waist, while Mia lingered in the doorway, eyes questioning. "Was that Mom?" she asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. I nodded, kneeling down to embrace the twins properly. "Yes, but she's gone now. We're all safe." "Is she taking us back?" Jordan asked, his voice small and frightened. The question broke my heart with its layers of meaning. The fear in his voice made it clear that returning to Sandra wasn't something he wanted, yet the uncertainty of our current arrangement wasn't providing the stability he needed either. "Not today," I assured him. "Today, we're all staying right here together." As I held my siblings close, I made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, I would ensure they never felt abandoned again, even if that meant redefining my entire life to accommodate theirs. Some burdens are actually privileges in disguise. The 6 months following Sandra's dramatic reappearance transformed our lives in ways I never could have anticipated. The immediate aftermath involved a flurry of court hearings where Sandra made increasingly unconvincing claims of a misunderstanding about the abandonment. Her arguments fell apart when faced with the evidence, the note in her handwriting, the unanswered calls and messages, social media posts from Las Vegas celebrating their fresh start. The most powerful testimony came from the children themselves. In a private meeting with the judge, Mia described years of neglect beneath the radar of official intervention. The twins, in their simple, direct way, explained how they had always relied on me rather than their mother for their basic needs and emotional support. These statements, coupled with school records showing improved attendance and performance since coming to live with me, weighed heavily in the final decision. The judge's admonishment of Sandra was scathing. "Parenthood is not a part-time occupation that can be abandoned when inconvenient," he stated firmly. "These children deserve consistency and commitment, not conditional care based on your personal circumstances." The temporary guardianship was extended indefinitely, with supervised visitation rights granted to Sandra contingent upon her completion of parenting classes and substance abuse assessment. Mark, having fled back to Las Vegas upon learning of his legal vulnerability, disappeared from our lives entirely. The financial revelations brought by grandmother Dorothy proved equally significant. The family trust established by my grandfather before his death, when I was too young to remember him, had been intended to provide educational support for both Sandra and her children. Sandra had systematically diverted these funds for personal use, leaving nothing for my education or the younger children's future needs. Legal restitution was ordered, providing unexpected financial stability during our transition. With these funds, we were able to break our lease without penalty and find a 3-bedroom apartment in the same school district, allowing the children to maintain their new educational connections. The moving process was bittersweet, leaving behind the small space where Ethan and I had begun building our life together. But the excitement of the children choosing paint colors for their new rooms eased the transition. "The twins can share the blue room," Mia declared as we toured the new apartment. "I need the purple one because I'm older and need privacy." The casual way she planned for permanence, assuming this arrangement would continue long-term, both warmed and terrified me. The responsibility was enormous, yet seeing the children begin to relax into stability made every sacrifice worthwhile. Establishing new routines in our expanded household took time and patience. House rules evolved through family meetings where everyone had input. Chore charts appeared on the refrigerator, homework schedules were negotiated, and bedtime routines established. The twins thrived with the consistency, while Mia gradually relaxed her hypervigilance as she realized she no longer needed to be a substitute parent. My professional life required significant adjustment. Diane, recognizing the impossibility of maintaining my previous schedule, offered a flexible arrangement with partial remote work that allowed me to balance career and caregiving. The promotion I had been working toward was temporarily set aside, a disappointment cushioned by Diane's assurance that my path remained open when circumstances allowed. "You're managing an entire household crisis with grace," she told me during a performance review. "Those leadership skills will serve you well when you're ready to step up again." Ethan proved to be the steady presence all of us needed during this transformation. Without complaint, he adjusted to a household suddenly filled with children's voices, homework challenges, and the constant energy of the twins. He instituted weekly game nights that became a family favorite, taught Jordan to ride a bike in the park near our new apartment, and patiently helped Mia with algebra when I was overwhelmed with other responsibilities. "You didn't sign up for instant fatherhood," I said one night after the children were asleep, guilt gnawing at me as I watched him review household expenses. "I signed up for a life with you," he replied simply. "That includes whatever challenges come our way." The wedding plans, postponed indefinitely during the initial crisis, reemerged in modified form. The elaborate celebration we'd initially envisioned transformed into a simpler ceremony with the children fully integrated. Mia would be my maid of honor, the twins serving as ring bearers. The date was set for the following spring, a tangible goal representing our family's new beginning. Therapy became a cornerstone of our healing process. The children attended both individual and group sessions, processing the abandonment and earlier neglect in age-appropriate ways. I continued my own therapy learning to navigate my complex new role as sister guardian rather than enabling adult daughter. Even Ethan participated in family sessions, establishing his place in our unconventional family structure. Most surprising was Sandra's slow steps toward accountability. Initially resistant to the court-mandated interventions, she gradually began showing signs of genuine change. After breaking ties with Mark when he was arrested for probation violations, she entered an outpatient addiction treatment program that revealed substance abuse issues deeper than I had recognized. 3 months after the abandonment, she requested a meeting through her court-appointed supervisor. Sitting across from her in a sterile visitation room, I hardly recognized the subdued woman before me. "I've been a terrible mother," she stated without preamble, "and a worse daughter and sister, and probably human being in general." The admission delivered without the usual deflection or manipulation caught me off guard. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked cautiously. "Because part of recovery is making amends," she replied. "Not expecting forgiveness, just acknowledging the harm I've caused." She paused, swallowing visibly. "I was never ready to be a mother. I resented you for being better at it than me, even as a child yourself. Instead of being grateful, I was jealous and sabotaged you whenever possible." The words I had longed to hear for decades landed with surprising emptiness. There was no triumphant satisfaction, just a quiet sadness for all of us caught in patterns established long before any of us could understand their consequences. "What do you want now?" I asked the practical question beneath all the emotional ones. "A chance to do better," she replied. "Not to take them back, I understand that's not what's best right now. But to be in their lives in a positive way, if you'll allow it." My feelings about Sandra's redemption attempt remained complicated, a mixture of cautious hope and ingrained skepticism. The children's well-being remained my priority, requiring careful navigation of potential disappointment against the benefits of a healthier relationship with their mother. Supervised visits began tentatively once monthly and strictly structured. The twins approached these reunions with anxious excitement, while Mia maintained a protective emotional distance. Sandra, to her credit, accepted these boundaries without complaint, bringing appropriate gifts and taking genuine interest in their activities and accomplishments. 1 year after the day Sandra abandoned her children on my doorstep, we held a quiet celebration in our new apartment. Not celebrating the abandonment itself, but the family we had become in its aftermath. The dining table was set with pizza and homemade cupcakes, decorated by the twins. Photographs from our year together lined the walls, visual evidence of healing and growth. "I want to make a toast," Mia announced, raising her glass of sparkling cider. At 15, she had blossomed in the stability of our new arrangement, rejoining the honor roll and developing a passion for photography. To Pascal and Ethan for showing us what real parents look like. The simple declaration brought tears to my eyes. "We're not perfect," I reminded her gently. "You don't have to be perfect," Jordan interjected with the straightforward wisdom of an 11-year-old. "You just have to be there." Out of the mouths of babes, the answer to the question that had haunted me for months. Was I the asshole for calling the police when my mother abandoned my siblings at my door? The system wasn't perfect. The process had been painful, but being there, truly present and committed to these children's well-being, was what mattered most. The legal guardianship was formalized that month with a visitation plan for Sandra that acknowledged the children's preference to primarily remain with me. Our family structure was unconventional, but it worked. The engagement was back on with wedding plans proceeding. The children were thriving in school and activities. We had created stability from chaos, permanence, from abandonment. I had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all being family isn't about obligation born of shared DNA. It's about showing up day after day through challenges and celebrations alike. Sometimes being the bad guy who calls authorities or sets uncomfortable boundaries is actually being the responsible one who breaks destructive cycles. So was I the asshole? I finally had my answer. No. I was simply the adult who refused to let children suffer for their parents' choices. And I'd make the same decision again without hesitation. What difficult family decisions have you had to make to protect those you love? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to hear more stories of family transformation, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in making tough choices for the right reasons. Thank you for listening to my journey from crisis to healing. Remember, sometimes the most painful moments lead to our greatest growth.